Okay, we're streaming.
We're good. Okay, hello everybody. It is February the 1st. Welcome to the Education Policy and Directions meeting. I am your chair, Trustee Ryan Painter, for the Education Policy and Directions Standing Committee. Before we move forward into the agenda, I do want to just quickly recognize that today is the start of Black History Month, and I had a particularly poignant quote from Rosemary Brown, the Honorable Rosemary Brown, that I wanted to read tonight. And the quote goes like this. For myself, Mr. Speaker, she was an MLA, as you may know. For myself, Mr. Speaker, I will always remember that during those tragic days of slavery in the United States, slaves always knew that if they could escape to Canada, they would find a haven here. I will always remember, Mr. Speaker, that all across the country, from Halifax to Victoria, there were stops on the Underground Railroad supported by women and men of goodwill. I will always remember, Mr. Speaker, that the great and honorable gentleman, Governor James Douglas, who welcomed to this city in 1858 freed Black women and men fleeing the terrible fugitive slave law of the United States, a law which allowed free slaves, if recaptured, to be returned to their masters, a law which led to the state of California itself considering to introduce slavery. These Black people sailed into Victoria Harbor. This same Victoria Harbor, Mr. Speaker, aboard the Brother Jonathan, a ship in whose memory, Mr. Speaker, our youngest son has been named, and they were welcomed on their arrival by the people of this great city. So you see, Mr. Speaker, you all are part of our history, and we are a part of yours, and may we never forget that. I wanted to just read that out because I think it's particularly poignant given that we are at the beginning of Black History Month, and I think it's important we think about the contributions that Black people have made to our province over the untold centuries. And in fact, our very first governor, James Douglas, was himself Black. So I think it's just important that we reflect on that. So I wanted to read that out. Introduction of our members tonight really quick so folks know who we are operating with at this committee. So we have members, Trustee Duncan, who can wave if you want or not. We have Chair and Trustee Jordan Waters, and myself, who are the voting members of the committee. And then we have Trustees Angie Hensa, who is here, Trustee Rob Painter, and I believe I saw Trustee Ann Whitaker as well, and Trustee Elaine Leonard. So we have a good complement from our Operations Committee meeting here tonight. And also wanted to provide regrets from Trustee Diane McNally. She was intending to come tonight, but she's not feeling well, so she sends her regrets. And before we go into approval of the agenda as well, I just want to mention anybody who is watching in and tuning in who wants to send questions, you can email question@sd61.bc.ca. Again, that's question@sd61.bc.ca, and I'll read that out again a little bit later. So we'll go into approval of the agenda for February 1st, 2021. Can I have a motion to approve? Trustee Duncan?
Sorry, actually, Chair, just quickly, before we approve the agenda, did I miss the territorial acknowledgement?
Yes, thank you. Let me jump back and we'll just read that out. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That the Greater Victoria School District wishes to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. And thank you very much, Trustee Duncan, for flagging that for me. Okay, we'll go into approval of the agenda. Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I just have a couple of amendments, if I may.
Go ahead.
So through the chair, so the first one is at the top of our agenda, you're listed as our chairperson. We normally would include the members of the committee as well, just listed on the top of the agenda. So I wondered if we could make that amendment, maybe hopefully a friendly amendment.
Yeah, I have to refer back to previous agendas. I don't see an issue with that, but yeah, okay, I'm sure that's a friendly amendment we can make.
Okay, and then the other amendments are at C21 and C3A, and so of the minutes. So at C21, it says inclusive learning strategies, 70% complete, LM or elementary, short for elementary and middle, 2021 focus on secondary schools. And I just wanted us to add to the minute because I think, you know, it was a very fulsome presentation, and I think it's worth noting that the team indicated that 30% that's remaining pertains to the creation of inclusive learning spaces at the secondary schools. So just adding in after the 2021 focus on secondary schools and the creation of necessary inclusive learning space. And then, Chair, did you want me to go right into the next amendment, or did you want to vote on each amendment?
Let's take these one step at a time if we have a few of them. So the first one I think is fine. We have an amendment to the minutes, but I don't think we're in the minutes yet. I think we're still in the agenda.
Pardon
so maybe
me,
let's
I'm
deal with
sorry.
the agenda first before
Yeah.
we jump into the minutes,
Sounds
if that's
good.
okay. Trustee Duncan,
That's
thank
absolutely
you.
fine. Thank you.
So we have an agenda in front of us with no amendments. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Moved by Trustee Waters. Thank you. All those in favor? And none opposed, and that is unanimous. And now we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. And Trustee Duncan has flagged the change in C2.1. I'm not sure if there's any comments or questions on that. If we think that is just a addition of some pieces of information, I think that should be okay. So okay, maybe if you do have several minute adjustments there, Trustee Duncan, because maybe we'll just move them all at once if they're just wording changes.
Just one more. There's just one more, and that's C3A. And again, it's just to provide a little bit more on the record of what was discussed in this. So this was the one, C3A. This was the board authority authorized course on aviation maintenance. And so under A, it says questions of clarification were asked. I suggest that we include in the minutes one of the important points that District Vice Principal Johnson informed the committee about, and that was that, so I suggest the amendment is District Vice Principal Johnson clarified that outstanding health and safety remediations at Mount Doug Shop will be completed prior to it hosting the new BAA course.
Okay, so that is your amendment.
Yeah, and that would come after questions of clarification were asked.
Okay. Do we have, I just want to turn to staff. Are there any concerns about that? I mean, minutes are intended to be a high-level summary of what's been discussed. I know they're not absolutely intended to be word-for-word repetitions of what we have, so I often turn to staff to allow them to determine how best to provide minutes. Do staff have any concerns about the addition that we're making there? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Chair, and then we'll go to Superintendent Green.
I just have a concern about sort of picking and choosing and rewriting. And one thing I like about our minutes is that we have a staff person objectively, create a minute, and that it stays very high level. And I'm just concerned about this new practice of wanting to sort of rewrite the minutes. Obviously, if something is incorrect, I want to correct that, but I'm not sure that I want to spend time at the beginning of our meeting rewriting or inserting, whole phrases, clauses, paragraphs.
Thank you, Chair Trustee Waters, and we'll go over to Superintendent Green.
Just in concurring what minutes are about, they are about the BAW course, the overview of what this course is, and that's what the board had pushed through and voted for. Questions and clarifications about specifics on the building or rooms about it, people can always hear them if they go back and listen to any of the video clips that we have. But that's more of a specification on one of the rooms and a question that would have clarification in there, not necessarily about the general BAW course.
All right, thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate that. Trustee Whitaker, you had an additional point you wanted to make?
Yeah, I do. And I'm hearing your concerns, but I just think we need to go to process and to Robert's rules, and the minutes belong to the board. And even if you're not at the meeting, you get to vote on it and decide whether the minutes are correct, and you can amend them any way you want. It becomes a vote of the board. I mean, if we were seriously changing them, but if there was a significant point, as I'm hearing Trustee Duncan wants to add, that she thinks is valid in the minutes, then that's why we do this whole process of amending the minutes. So as much as people might think that this is awkward, this is the game. So I don't have a vote or anything, but I just want to make sure that we are understanding that that is the process, and that's just how we operate. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going, Trustee Duncan, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to clarify that certainly my intention is not to make the process of agreeing a minute onerous or to redraft them in any way. The reason I wanted to add that particular line was because it was so essential to the conversation that we had as a committee, and one of the bases for supporting the motion. And so I think it speaks to, you know, accountability and transparency about the basis of our decisions, and I think that it warrants it being included as one line in the minutes, which is why I raised it.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Duncan. I'm going to go to the amendment then to the minutes. We have two. We have one under C2, C2, adjusting the piece under 2021 focus, and then adjusting under C3A. And I'm going to see if we have approval to amend the minutes. All those in favor of the voting members of the committee? All those opposed? And the amendment fails. So we'll go back to approval of the minutes. Do we have any other adjustments or corrections? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor of approval of the minutes from the January 4th Ed Policy and Directions meeting? All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Business arising from the minutes. We have none. Sorry, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just bear with me a second. Just get into my note. Okay, so again, under C2, the district team update, I just wanted to follow up. The district team very kindly answered a few questions about their presentation. And one of those questions was around the request for assessments and how long it's taking at the moment to clear requests for assessment. And the team indicated that it was taking, or that the requests for assessment were being completed in no more than a month or so. And I just wanted to clarify under that point that we're talking about requests for assessments, not the assessments themselves. And so I wondered if somebody from the team could just clarify that. Whether it's the request for assessments that are taking a month to clear, or whether it's the assessments themselves that are being done in around a month.
Okay, thank you. We'll turn to either Superintendent Green or Deputy Superintendent Witten. Yeah, go ahead, Deputy Superintendent. Thank you.
Actually, we're very fortunate to have Pam and Sean on tonight's meeting. So I wonder if Pam or Sean would be able to answer this or clarify.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead, Pam.
I can jump in. Requests for, I think we're talking about a psych ed, a complete psych ed assessment. Those requests are processed relatively quickly, depending on paperwork getting in on time and all those kinds of things. So those get queued up. So that part really doesn't take that long. It could take several weeks. Sometimes it's very quick. It really does depend on the turnaround on paperwork coming back to process the request. Then the actual psych ed being completed can take longer because, again, that's a time-consuming process. It depends on a number of things. Right now in COVID, sometimes that's even longer because of the time spent with kids and the comfort level and all of those kinds of things. So.
Thank you, Pam. Trustee Duncan, was that sufficient?
Yeah, I just had a follow up there quickly, if I may, Chair. Thank you. I just wondered, so do we have a backlog of assessments at the moment then?
Pam, we can put that back to you. Go ahead.
Sure. Do we have a backlog? I would say we don't have a backlog. Do we always have more requests than we are probably able to fulfill in any one school year? Yes. Probably.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I did want to recognize that Trustee Ferris has joined us. Thank you, Trustee Ferris. Really great to have you here with us tonight. Okay, just checking. Oh, I see Trustee Rob Painter. Go ahead, please.
Thanks very much, and apologies for horning in on this one. Just a follow-up question on that same point. In the past, it was the practice that assessments would be allocated out to schools, typically at 8 per at least elementary school. I'm not sure just what the complete division was, and I would just appreciate clarification of whether or not that's still the case, and if so, is there a waiting list that is maintained either at the school level or at the district level? Because that was one of the ongoing challenges in the past, is that at the district level, it was said, oh, we don't have any outstanding ones. And yet repeatedly we would hear from school staff of students who didn't receive them. So I just want to make sure that we're accurately tracking all of the students who are being considered by their school-based teams for assessments, and that we are monitoring their progress to ensure that no one's falling through the cracks. Thank you.
So, sorry, Trustee Painter, I do appreciate the question, but I'm just curious if you can point to where this is business arising from the minutes. I just want to be really clear. This is a section where we were discussing business arising from the minutes of January 4th. And I just want to be sure that we are following process and making sure we're abiding by that. Thank you.
No, that's reasonable. I'll withdraw my question and save it for a more appropriate time.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Trustee Rob Painter. So if nothing further, we'll move on to presentations to the committee. We have B1, Climate Change and Student Voices, Hannah Shepard, grade 5 student from Strawberry Vale. We are very excited to have you here, Hannah. I can't quite see you on my screen, but I'm guessing you are here. We will turn the floor over to you.
Hi. I am Hannah Shepard, and I am speaking for ADTWIC. It stands for the Anti-Destruction of the World Club. It's a bit extreme, but I think it gets our point across. I didn't do this project by myself. There were some other people who did it with me. Just wanted to say that. Can I go to the next slide, please?
Andy, are you moving slides for her?
Sorry, Hannah, I think this just got paused a second. Could someone just confirm that Hannah's front slide is being shared?
Her front slide is being shared.
Okay, 1 second. There we go, Hannah. All yours.
Okay. Introductions. We have ignored the climate crisis for far too long. We need to start to take action now. In this slideshow, we will present some of our ideas to help stop climate change and make schools net zero before 2030. This next slide will have some options of things you could do if you decide to do some of the stuff we suggest. Next slide. Okay. Ways we can help stop climate change. Saving up for solar panels. Sorry, I don't know if I did my maths right on that question. I really hope I did. This would cost around $2,300,000. Planting more trees. Encouraging groups dedicated to helping the environment and stopping climate change. Asking if teachers can inform their students about climate change. Giving schools compost bins. This may not be an option right now with COVID-19. Giving classrooms more worm bins. Worms can eat some of the food that we would put in the compost, banana peels, etc. more biodiversity on school district property, getting more books to inform students about the global problem we have on our hands. After COVID-19, if the Fun Lunch program continues, you could ask that students bring their own utensils, which would be an alternate from plastic knives, forks, and spoons. Encouraging less use of bottled water and more water bottles. Next slide, please. Why it is so important. The reason why we are so worried about climate change is because the world only has about 11 years to stop the changing of the climate before it is irreversible. Imagine a world where there are way more pandemics, a world where the West Coast is stripped bare, and there will be no clean air for hundreds of miles around. And imagine a world where people are in rocket ships going away from the planet as fast as they can to try to live on a nice, non-polluted planet. Scary, but possible. And if that scares you, and if you're like me, then you have the right reaction. But you can change that. If you do your part, and I do mine, you can look forward to a future where there is a lot more trees, no mass-produced meat, clean air, no mass-produced meat, clean air, and carbon zero cities. But first, we need to work on the global problem, and that is climate change. Next slide, please. Conclusions. We hope you consider some of our ideas. Remember, we need to act soon and act wisely. Create achievable goals that create an impact, and we need to follow through on those goals to step forward, create a better future for me, for you, and for generations to come. I don't know about you, but I don't want to tell my kids, if I have any, that I was responsible for the destruction of the planet. I really hope you enjoyed our presentation or learned something from it. Let's sure we can make all schools carbon neutral, or try to make sure, in as little time as possible. Thank you for letting me speak.
Wow. Thank you so much, Hannah. That was absolutely fantastic. I don't know what I was doing in grade 5, but I wasn't talking about climate change, and I wasn't presenting in front of a whole bunch of adults. So that was marvelous. Well done. Any questions or comments from trustees? I'm seeing lots of thumbs up, Hannah. You made an impression. So well done. Well done. Big hearts. Okay, so we will move on now to B2. Food programming, Myra Lawrence, Executive Director of the Oaklands Community Association. And Myra, that's a tough act to follow. Good luck.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Hannah, thank you so much for that presentation. That was so impressive from a grade 5 student. And that is a very, very tough act to follow. Thank you, Chair Waters and trustees, for having me here to speak quickly to you. I don't have a beautiful presentation like that. I don't even have a pitch for you. I just have a really good feel-good story about some of the work that you're doing as trustees and involved with the school district that you may not know about. I joined Oakland's Community Association almost coming up on my 1-month anniversary in the executive director's role. So I'm fairly new to this. So a lot of what I've been doing is observing and seeing what kind of good services we do for the Oakland's community at our center. Of course, with COVID, things have had to pivot. Recreation programs have been backed off. We're still doing our out of school care program where we have about 150 kids. But what we've really found interesting, and what I found interesting, which is kind of near and dear to my heart, is our food security program. There's been a real need as folks are struggling right now to make sure that people can put nutritious food on their table, even in a middle class community like Oakland's. So our food security program has become number one. And one of my board members, who's also a member of the PAC, has come up with a wonderful idea called the Munchie Cart. Originally, it was called Breakfast Club, but club seemed a little bit inclusive or exclusive. So we've changed it to Munchie Cart. So there was a definite need, recognized that some of our kids at our school, at Oakland's Elementary, right next door to our community center, were going without. So in a COVID safe way, we launched on January 4th, the day that I started work, a food, breakfast, lunch, snack program for kids. And where we have a cart that we wheel over there with a brown paper bag lunch that has a cheese string, a muffin, a piece of fruit, where a child can come by and grab a bag, whether it be breakfast, lunch, or on their way home, so that they'll have some food in their tummy. It started out on January 4th as a 3-day-a-week pilot project. By January 5th, we were doing it 5 days a week. We started with about 15 bagged lunch snack bags, and I can tell you that today, in less than a month, we're up to 30. And all the bags were gone. So there is a need out there for this program. To me, this is a great partnership and a win-win-win when you look at it between SD 61 with the PAC and the good work that we're doing at Oakland's Elementary. The bagged lunches are made at our place by our volunteers, taken over to the school where the kids can go without shame and grab a bagged lunch or a snack on their way home. It is part of a bigger program that we're launching with our food scarcity out of COVID. As we said, the need was great. We've launched a pantry program at Oakland's where for 1 hour on Saturdays, folks can come who are part of the Oakland's community, who attend families that attend Oakland's elementary school, to come and get some fresh produce, some meat. This is a partnership between us, between the Mustard Seed, and between Red Cedar Cafe and a group of volunteers. And I can tell you, trustees, I'm shocked by this program. It launched in October, and we have had we fed over 1,000 mouths. We have anywhere between 80 to 100 people coming to line up on a Saturday to get their weekly goods. And this is just a great opportunity. Recently, we've reached out today we sent a grant to the United Way. We've reached out to the City of Victoria and also TELUS Community to help us fund this. I'm going to also reach out to some sponsors and see if other local businesses want to help us, because now that we have these food programs in place, the pantry program, which is feeding our families and our children, they can't go away. So we need to find a way to make these sustainable. So Capital Daily, a new online publication, launched a program at the just before the end of Christmas there, and with some matching funds. So a bunch of community houses got just over $10,000, and we are going to use our money to continue this program along with SD 61 and the PAC to continue this program to feed our young people and make sure that they have a nutritious lunch or snack, and continue to find the funding to do this. So it's been in the media. CTV is going to pick up our story. And I just wanted to share something that feels good about, I know everybody's busy and you're all high level people, but that this is what, your volunteer hours are doing on the ground, that we are seeing and reaping the rewards from. And when you're having a crummy day and we're all COVID bummed out, just know that this volunteer hour, sitting here on this Monday night in this meeting, and the decisions that you're making at the table really do matter. And I appreciate it as a new ED here at Oakland's. And I really do look forward to other initiatives that we can work on and to fostering our relationship and growing it with SD 61.
Wow. That's phenomenal, Myra. The warm fuzzies that I got, like shivers like that. The work that you're doing in such a short period of time is incredible. Thank you so much. I saw Trustee Ferris had his hand up, so I'm going to go to you, Trustee Ferris.
Thanks so much, and thank you, Myra. As somebody who volunteered for many years serving breakfast at my local elementary school, I really value the personal connections that you're making. It's so important to people to be able to talk to the person who's helping them out, and it just helps them get through their day or their week or whatever. And yeah, we really value what you're doing. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And it's that personal connection and the relationship building and just being able to feel like you're contributing and helping people. You know, there's a greater cause than I feel all of us. So it's just like, this is what Oakland's can do right now, along with your support as a school district, as long as the PAC supports, and as long as we get some funding to continue to put some food in those bellies, we'll continue fighting the good fight.
Right on. Thank you so much, Myra. Trustee Rob Painter.
Thanks very much. And again, I echo my support for everything that's being done. In the time that I had the privilege to work as a trustee liaison to Oakland's, it was very clear that that's a community that really, it recognizes itself as a community and acts for the well-being of all its members. And this is just one more fantastic example. So thank you very much. Shifting slightly, meal programs are one of the things that we also work on as part of the district. I was wondering to the superintendent, one of the discussions that we had last school year was that the community link model was going to be amended to give us better coverage for the students who do need this kind of support. And I was just wondering if we'll be getting a report on that at some point in the future.
You are correct, Trustee Painter, that we talked a lot about how the Community Link program was reevaluating and reshifting on the needs that we have. Certainly happy to bring them back a fulsome report. If trustees would like to put forward a motion of what they would like in that report, we're happy to oblige.
Thank you, Superintendent. And again, Myra, from all of us to your amazing little group that's making a huge impact. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And Myra, you can stay around if you want, or you're free to go if you want to as well. It's totally up to you.
I think I'm gonna go lick my wounds after watching that Canucks game right now. So
yeah, let's not talk about that.
No. Thank you
Myra.
very much for the opportunity.
Have a great night.
You too.
And next we go to B3 Esports League. Tim Saylor, the ball is in your court to take. I really didn't intend on that pun. I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
All right. Thank you so much for having me aboard. I want to acknowledge the people of the Songhe and the Esquimalt Nations and the privilege of working and playing on their land. Does someone have my slideshow?
Hi Tim, I can share your slideshow and hopefully I'll do a better job of it than the last effort. So
no worries.
Let me do that now. Okay. Just let me know you can see the front slide, please, Tim, and it's all yours.
I can see it. Thank you so much, Andy.
Okay.
So I'd like to ask the board to consider an organized esports league within the high schools of the school district 61. So if we could just head to the overview, I'll give you a brief look over my presentation. So I'm going to provide my personal connection to the topic, the benefits that could come about of implementing an esports league, the traditional oppositional arguments, and then I'm going to look at both the costs of implementing an esports league and some possible games for esports. So for me, growing up, I participated in extracurriculars in high school, but my true love was video games, and I was quite good at them. I got an opportunity to play for a team, but without any mentor or leadership from adults, I didn't know how to develop that into a career, and I had to drop it. So I'd like to provide students with an opportunity to grow and develop their interests and to possibly take that forward into the future. Some of the benefits of implementing an esports league. If we could just move to the next slide, Andy. Thank you so much. So it gives students the social emotional learning and soft skills that employers are looking for. This is the core competencies of the BC curricular, the personal and social responsibility, the collaboration, the communication. It's equal opportunity and inclusive. So any students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds can have an opportunity to engage in something that they might not otherwise get. and it doesn't have to be gender divided like most traditional school sports are. There are lots of careers in both video games and esports, as it's emerging to be a quite popular industry. And a lot of universities, both in Canada and the States and abroad, are beginning to offer esports scholarships. In the age of the pandemic, it's also socially distanced. So you could have your cohort of the team and they could still play competitively against teams from other schools without having to be in close physical contact. And there's lots of literature on the brain development that esports provide. It fosters STEM. 80% of esports players go into STEM-related university programs, and it gives them a good basis in analytical, visual, spatial, and strategic thinking. It also helps improve student attention, and all of this correlates with the improved GPA and confidence from the students. So if we could just move on to the next slide. So some of the traditional arguments against esports are that it promotes a sedentary lifestyle. Video games can be addictive. Students on the internet have to worry about their privacy and security. And the ever prevalent violent video games create violent and antisocial tendencies. I believe that all of these could be mitigated with the effect of a leader adult in the room, a coach. So especially for the sedentary lifestyle, with a mandatory fitness period to get the students' brains and bodies warmed up before playing esports, they'll have both physical and mental fitness. A coach can talk to them about having a balanced lifestyle and creating internet literate students so that they can be aware of the dangers of being online and putting personal information out on the internet. And in terms of violence and aggression, competitive sports also have a similar correlation, but these can be mediated through the social emotional skills of the coach and also mitigated by the violence in the video games. If it's less realistic, less like Call of Duty Modern Warfare shooting where it's perceived to be really realistic, those effects are much less. So if we could just move on to the next slide. So potential costs for this would actually be very low for both the schools and the school district. Any school with a computer lab should be able to support an esports team. Possible additional costs that are very optional to the schools could be hardware such as headsets, mice, or keyboards. And another one is coaching. So I would assume that most teachers wouldn't have the skills or knowledge to properly coach an esport if they haven't played it themselves. But there are lots of online coaches who are very good at what they do, where you can send them a replay and they could analyze the gameplay and get back to you with what your team needs to improve. And then the coach could be there more for team building and emotional support of the students. My recommendations for games to implement as an esports league would be League of Legends or Rocket League. They're both free to play, so there's no installation cost associated with them. They both have large online followings. League of Legends is the most popular game in the world right now, and it has good potential for careers and scholarships outside of the esports itself. League of Legends is rated teen. The teams are fighting to destroy the other team's base, and Rocket League is essentially soccer with cars. So League of Legends is 5-on-5 and Rocket League is 3-on-3. And I would like to open the floor to any questions now.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Tim. And you were right on the money. I feel like you were timing that. Well done. So we will take questions now from the floor. I see Trustee Whitaker and Trustee Rob Painter. So we'll go to you, Trustee Whitaker, first.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I think it's very interesting and somewhat timely. I'm very aware that this is something that is, picking up, as you say, everywhere. For obviously a different demographic than myself. I don't necessarily get it, but I acknowledge that my kids are into it. And they are definitely watching these teams play and they're cheering for them. And it's very, very big. And my question to you is, or maybe a little piece of information for you first, is I am aware that the robotics and a lot of these things that we now see as competitions all started by a club in a school. It's
Mhm.
usually a pack, and they start a club, and then from there, you know, these have become courses and the BA courses that we were talking about earlier, etc. So have you talked to any parent advisory councils at the high school levels or engaged any students who want to start this? Because all you need to start a club is a couple of kids and a teacher sponsor.
Yeah, so I haven't talked to any of the teachers at any of the high schools yet, but I know at one of my practicum schools in Vanderhoof in northern British Columbia, they had an esports club, and there were several games that they played. But one of the biggest problems and complaints from the kids there is they didn't have anyone to compete against, and only like one game in their club was actually able to like travel to compete in regional tournaments in Prince George. So I think that I would be more than happy to go around to several high schools and talk to them about implementing clubs and then organizing play against for them to play against other teams within the region for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, you might want to think about, even if you get one club, maybe do that provincial connections, right?
Totally. Yeah, because that's one of the benefits. They can compete against anyone in the province or country.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Trustee Whitaker. We'll go over to Trustee Rob Painter next.
Thanks very much, Tim. And this really, it speaks to the diversity of opportunities that are out there. And that's one of the things that I love about our secondary schools. You know, back when I was going to high school, we had like you know, the debate club and a reach for the top club, but outside of actual sports, that was pretty much it for the opportunities. And this is really just showing the range of different activities that are out there and available. And I have to admit, it astounded me when I actually started looking into esports and witnessed stadiums full of people watching young adults play video games. It's a whole nother world that I just not touched on. But following on what Trustee Whitaker pointed out about you know, starting as a club, I could see real potential for this as club/team moving forward. Are there key issues about organizing a league? Is that something that you have background in or could provide guidance to? Because as you mentioned with the group in Vanderhoof, you know, it's getting competition organized that can be a big deal. So is that something that you've looked into or have any expertise on?
Well, it's not something that I personally have any expertise on, but I'd be more than willing to take on that challenge and develop that if possible. If high schools had the interest and needed someone to coordinate something like that. But the reason I brought it to you guys is because I wasn't sure if there's some athletic board who like coordinates the game schedules of like the football teams or whatever other sports that this needs to go through into, and if I could get into contact with them. So I was hoping to get board support and board guidance as to how to go about implementing this, and if it's something where it needs to be done at the individual level at every school, and then helping the schools coordinate so that they have some kind of like league and schedule, then that's something that I would be happy to look into.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, Trustee Painter, follow up.
Yeah, follow. I was wondering through the superintendent if this is something that we could have an inquiry through staff. You know, certainly we know about, you know, South Vancouver Island school sports and others. I'm not sure if this necessarily would quite fit the bill, but in that regard, as far as understanding what the existing structures and directions around sports are concerned, is that something that Tim could get some guidance on from us?
Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for presenting to us tonight. That was great. I'm going to introduce you to Colin Roberts, who's up in my screen on the top right-hand corner. He's our secondary associate superintendent, and perhaps that's a good place to begin. So if you can reach out to him, his email address is in front of you or it's on our website, and just send him an email and we'll make that initial connection and at least start a conversation.
Colin Roberts. Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you again for your presentation, Tim. It was, I'm not even, I was going to do a pun, but I'm just going to leave it alone. We've had enough puns. Thank you very much. Have a good night, Tim. And you can hang around for the rest of the meeting if you so desire.
Okay, thank you.
So now we're moving into C, new business, introduction of student representatives. Superintendent Green.
And as always, want to be thrilled and invite you to welcome Jillian, who's from Lambic Park, and Bryn from Spectrum. We had a great student rep meeting tonight, talked about climate and courses and how COVID is going, things that we want to continue, and even budget. So great to have them with us. As always, they can interact and be a part of our meeting, asking questions or offering their opinion, but very happy to have both of them here.
Wonderful. And yeah, Bryn and Jillian, please feel free to chime in, to put your hand up if you have a question or you want to make a point. We are your trustees, and we are your district, so it'd be great to hear from you too. Moving into C2, district team budget process, 2021-2022 opportunities and gaps, alignment to strategic plan initiatives, Deputy Superintendent Witten, and a cast of amazing characters. So we will toss it over to you, Deputy Superintendent Witten.
Thank you very much, Trustee Painter. I'll just ask Andy if he can load the PowerPoint up.
Yeah, one moment, Deb. Just load that up now. Okay, you should be able to see the front screen.
Great. And you can advance it by one, please. Super. So our presentation tonight is by members of the district team as well as members of the senior leadership team. And in the presentation, we'll provide you with information regarding the opportunities, the gaps, and our alignment with the strategic plan as we continue to review our data, our initiatives, and our plans in order to budget for the 2021-22 school year. This slide, which we've seen in previous meetings, highlights the connections between the strategic plan, the board work plan, the district's operational plan, our school growth plans, and how we align resources to impact student success. And you'll see along the way that we keep the student learning experience at the center of all of this. Next slide, please. So we've divided the presentation tonight to align with our 3 goals of the strategic plan. Tammy and I will speak to the work that our district team is doing in support of goal 1. Colin and Shelley will speak to goal 2, and Harold and Pam will speak to goal 3. Throughout the presentation, district team members will highlight some of the data from sources such as the EDI, the MDI, completion rates, student learning survey, and FSA will all help frame our work. And we recognize that some of the data, like the FSA, can be controversial due to a variety of things, including the number of students that we have who participate in the FSA. But it is important to note that the FSA is useful data for us to utilize. FSA and the literacy and numeracy assessments align with the revised curriculum, and they can assess us or assist us as we look at how well our students are doing in developing reading, writing, and numeracy. The data can also help us plan and support early interventions and then track the interventions to measure their success. And next slide. As such, one of our areas of focus for the district team is to become more data literate in order to analyze our strengths and our gaps, and then appropriately align our initiatives and resource our work. So in addition to looking at the data, we also pay attention to research, like the research from the organizations such as OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And we do this before we plan the initiatives for the year, and then obviously budget as we require in order to positively impact that student learning experience. Next slide. Goal number 1, as we've seen, is to create an inclusive and culturally responsive learning environment that will support all learners' personal and academic success. As a district team, when we unpack this goal, we need to look at our data, our evidence, and our stories regarding our culturally responsive, inclusive practices in the areas of instructional strategies and assessment practices. Research tells us that in order to improve all learners' personal and academic success, we must provide job-embedded professional learning opportunities for staff. And the next goal, or next slide. In this slide on the left, you'll see the EDI, which is the Early Development Instrument. And on the right, you'll see the 6-year completion rates. The EDI measures 5 core areas of early childhood development that are known to be good predictors of adult health, education, and social outcomes: physical health and well-being, language and cognitive development, social competence, emotional maturity, and communication skills and a general knowledge are the areas that are assessed. Child vulnerability refers to the portion of the population which, without additional support and care, may experience future challenges at school. The data on this slide shows us that our neighborhoods are relatively stable over time. 2 neighborhoods have had an increase in vulnerability and 2 have had a decrease, while the rest of the communities have stayed stable. The 6-year completion rates on the right, go back, thank you. The 6-year completion rates on the right show us that we have gaps in achievement rates of some students. In 2019, 2020, 85.4% of all of our students graduated, while 57.5% of our Indigenous students graduated and 77.4% students with a ministry designation graduated. To flip it the other way, it means that 42.5% of our Indigenous students didn't graduate and 22.6% of the students with a ministry designation didn't graduate. We recognize this achievement gap needs to be addressed. Given what we know from this data, we need to ensure our initiatives and resources specifically address the gaps. Without additional supports and care, we can't expect to see a change in our data. We must positively affect the learning experiences for Indigenous students, children and youth in care, and students with a ministry designation. When we create more inclusive and culturally responsive learning environments, all students benefit. In addition to becoming more data literate, our district team's focus is on creating a systematic response to instructional, assessment, and inclusive practices in a culturally responsive learning environment. Next slide. Over to Tammy.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So you can see in front, we have a slide about the FSA. And when we look at the grad rates, we have to back up and say what's happening for our students along the way and what some of the data that we have to inform us around some of the work we're doing. So the FSA is a snapshot that can provide insight into how our students are doing in the areas of literacy and numeracy. The FSA reflects the learning standards in the redesigned curriculum and allows for us to see if the interventions and supports we are providing are making a difference. So when you have a look at this particular slide, you can see that 194 students were emerging, or 21.5%. You can also see that for our Indigenous students, 38.3% were in the emerging category, 55% in the on track, and then I just have to move you off my slide, and 6.7% in extending. So again, when we look at the grad rates that Deb just shared, and we're looking at our Indigenous ELL students with ministry designations, we want to see what are some early indicators around how those students are doing in terms of the grade 4 information. And another important piece for us is what Deb said at the beginning. 620 students didn't write. So when it comes in terms of the FSA, we don't know how those students are doing, and we don't know which demographic those students might represent. They may be children and youth in care, they may be Indigenous students, but we know we have 620 students not writing. Next slide, Andy. This is the grade 7 foundation skills assessment. This isn't the same cohort, this is the same year, so a different cohort of students. Again, as a snapshot, we can look and we notice that 29.9% emerging. When we look at our Indigenous students in grade 7, 50.8% emerging. So again, emerging is telling us that students are starting to struggle, and we know that without supports and interventions, they may continue to have difficulties as they go on in their education. 63.3% again in the emerging, and 617 students didn't write. So we don't actually know with relation to the FSA where those students are at. And the next slide. Data, the student learning survey is a really important piece of data. We've talked a lot about how important it is to have student voice. Students are the people who matter most in our system, and it's important to know how they're perceiving the work that's happening with them and for them. And what's significant about this survey or this particular piece of data is we may think we're being explicit in communicating with students what they need to do to be successful in the classroom, but this data is actually showing us that in some cases, 50% of our students don't understand what they should do on purpose in order to be successful in the classroom. And we know from the research that one of the most important factors for student success is teacher clarity and task understanding with success criteria. That research is Hattie, Fisher, and Frey. So we know that it's super important for us as a district team to continue to look at how do we articulate and align assessment principles so that students in class know what they need to do on purpose in order to be successful. And the next slide, it's super hard to capture all the amazing work that's happening across the district team. And so what we've tried to represent here is everything we're looking at doing is grounded in data, research, and learning. So pre-K to grade 12 plus, we continue to strive to align our work so that we're representing or getting the work as close to the student learning experience as possible. So Deb referred to that earlier. We know that to make the greatest difference for students, we need to be at the center where students are. So some of that K-12 alignment is focusing on creating culturally responsive learning systems. Carrie's going to speak a bit more about the early years and the powerful work they're doing with her team. We continue to look at equity, resources, and support across the system. And instructional design is a key piece that we're looking at as a team. How do we, with purpose and intention, create an instructional design that allows for deeper learning? That's based on the foundations of both inclusion, assessment, First People's principles of learning. And additionally, considering cognitive and emotional readiness, self-regulated learning, social emotional wellness, understanding of the brain and learning. So as Deb referred to earlier, professional learning needs to be strategic, job embedded, and continuous. And we continue to work towards inquiry cycles where teachers, education assistants, principals and vice principals, and our specialists can look at data, set goals, work together to create that sense of efficacy that we can make a difference for our children, reassess, reflect, and begin again. The focus needs to continue to be on the children we serve, and we need to consider how we build agency and voice for children. Examples of how we're bringing this work forward this year and into next year includes learning rounds, targeted professional learning for EAs, educators, principals, and vice principals, a continued focus on the early years, development and explicit sharing of assessment principles, and a focus on school-based teams. Those are just some examples of the way we continue to work and move the work forward, all with the foundational piece of creating a more culturally aware, and I'm just going to move this, culturally responsive and culturally informed system.
So it's my pleasure to speak to you about Goal 2, along with Shelley Neame. And what we hope to do over the next few minutes is just build upon some of the comments made previously by Deputy Whitton and District Principal Renyard. And as you can see, goal 2 is to create a culturally responsive learning environment that will support Indigenous learners' personal and academic success. So if you could move us along, Andy. And so on this slide, I've chosen to focus on what I think many of us would see as kind of the summary of all of the years of work that students do within our educational systems, K to 12. Though we recognize that there are other data points which are equally important, we do think that the completion rates are widely looked upon as, let's say, a good summary of the district's success in terms of helping students move along. And another one of our reasons for focusing on the completion rates and this report in particular is that it comes from a public document. This is from the How Are We Doing report, and trustees will have seen this information previously for recent years, and it's just within the last week or so that the refreshed data or the new data for 2019, 2020 have been released, which have enabled us to see the newest graduation and completion rates. And so there are a couple of things that I would like to draw your attention to on the slide that you're viewing. And as we can quite clearly see, Indigenous students in the district do not perform as well on our standard tests and in terms of graduation as do all of the other categories of students within the district. So as the chart explains, the grey bands show the average performance of districts across the province, averaged over a 5-year period. And the orange line indicates SD 61 students' performance relative to, say, the median or the average for the province, with the dot in the middle indicating the most recent result. So whereas you can see for BC residents in Victoria in general, our students are very much in line with the performance of the bulk of the students across the province. And when we look at those students who are described as having special needs using the old ministry language, and we can see that Victoria students do better than average when compared to students in the province. So I think there's lots to be happy about in terms of how SD 61 students are able to compete once they leave our system. However, for our Indigenous students, it is very clear that not only do they fall behind the performance of their peers in school, they're also behind what might be considered the provincial averages. And so that range of performance has varied very greatly, as you can see, from as low as 40% to in excess of 60% over the last 5 years. But even at our best, we're not meeting that provincial average. And so I think that certainly indicates for us that there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done, and the inequity or disparity between the success rate of our Indigenous students and that of the general population. So at this point, I'm going to ask Shelley to take over and share some more information with you.
Wonderful, thank you, Colin. So I just want to acknowledge the work of the board with the strategic plan, because I do know that you recognized that goal 2 really was trying to be responsive on how do we create parity, right? And what does parity look like for Indigenous students within the Greater Victoria School District? And so we look and we lean back into that and we look at it. It says, okay, let's create a culturally responsive learning environment that will support Indigenous learners' personal and academic success. One of the things that you see on this slide here is all of the guiding documents that are federal and provincial that actually impact the work of Indigenous education that we are being responsive to, right? So we've got the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. We actually have UNDRIP, right? So the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which became law in BC for us, right? We also have Equity Scan, which we're uptaking right now currently as Greater Victoria School District to help us understand and scan some of our areas of growth and gaps that we're looking at. We have We also have the HOD report, which is what Colin had referenced to, the How Are We Doing report. So Indigenous students are often found in our data sets, right? And we have them as a specific demographic that we're looking at. And so what does our data tell us? When we look at the report on the bottom, that's the BC Auditor General's report on Indigenous student success within public education. We have our local education agreements, which we are uptaking with both of our nations. And then we also have the BC Tripartite Education Agreement. All of these foundational documents lean into what we look at as our research, right? They have guiding practices. They have pathways forward for us to be able to examine how do we close that parity gap that currently exists between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students across the public education system. And what do we need to do on purpose to be able to help us move that way forward? So if we can go to the next slide, Andy. It's going to talk about now, how do we start to bring some alignment to this? And this is what I think that the most proud that I am of the work of the district team and the way that we're trying to shape Greater Victoria as an entire family here. We're looking at how do we have alignment between our strategic plan, between the budget decisions that we're trying to make, and how we're trying to improve outcomes for children. And so when we look at that, goal 2 of our strategic plan, we're looking at how do we bring that alignment with the ministry and federal documents that guide Indigenous education? What do we know inside of those documents that are guiding practices for us and strategies that we want to be uptaking and implementing? And what does our data story tell us for Indigenous students in Greater Victoria School District? And where do we need to be able to sit within that data and look at the qualitative and the quantitative data and the narrative and the stories of our families? And then how do we bring that together as a district team to be able to say, here's how we're actually weaving this braid together across each one of these goals. And we're bringing that together. So we're having better conversations in regards to making decisions that are being responsive. When we're sitting in and saying, how are we actually being culturally responsive? We're actually being able to unpack that together as a family and no longer in isolation, right? And in these silos. So then that translates right into our school-based supports. When things are starting to come up for us across levels, elementary, middle, or secondary, or if they're coming up across families to schools, we're being able to identify all of the key people that now need to be a part of those conversations and how we need to be able to share some of our funding and our budgets. Who are our families? How is that data now being related to what we know and we're being informed of? And how are we being responsive to that, right? Are we actually being culturally responsive? What do we know better now, right? Which links into the further involvement where I think we're starting to see our Indigenous community partners feeling authentically consulted, right? Coming to the table, being a part of our conversations continuously. So it's not just a few times throughout the year. It's regular ongoing conversations, and not just with the Indigenous Education Department, with the entire district team, with our senior staff, right? Which is then translating back into our students and our families feeling the support. However, we still have a stretch to go because this is what our data is currently telling us. So if we go to the next slide, Andy. That's going to talk to us about, okay, how do we weave together and pull forward collectively as Greater Victoria School District and as a family? And what does that mean for us, right? So we have the early learning framework that we're starting to base some of our conversations in. How do we get Indigenous children and family into some of our early Strong Start centers? What does that look like? Who do we know is in the community? What do we know about early learning for Indigenous families, and how are we connecting that? We revised and looked at our children and youth in care, and we looked at the representation of Indigenous children and youth in care and the categories and the designations that they fell within that. And how are we now starting to bring alignment between delegated Indigenous agencies within MCFD and our district children and youth in care team? Right? What does that look like? And how do we start to be able to bring relevance and reciprocity to some of these conversations? Looking at that holistic mental health framework, right? So we lean back into those 4 R's of Indigenous pedagogy, which is reciprocity, it's relevant, it's respectful, and it's relational accountability, right? So how are we ensuring that these pieces of our education system are relevant for our children and our families that we're serving? We brought in our Elders Advisory Council this year, right? Something that that has been a wonderful experience because we're leaning into our elders more and more to be a part of not only just Indigenous education committees, but across our entire school system, right? So we're looking at those pieces. And then now we're looking forward. What do we need to do on purpose as we start to paddle forward next, right? Looking at how do we evoke land-based education? What is our data telling us about literacy and numeracy? And what does that mean for Indigenous students and for all learners? But what is our data telling us and what do we need to be able to do? And as we've gone through this current time, we're looking at Indigenous student re-engagement strategies. And the reason is that we've actually acknowledged and recognized, and community is telling us, our children are choosing with their feet and they're not coming to school at times, or there's high absenteeism in some of our schools that we're faced with. What do we need to do, and what are our voices and our families telling us? So we're coming together to be able to examine that as a family, right? So not just Indigenous education, but as a district team. And that's where we need to look at how do we start to be able to self-examine our curriculum and assessment practices, and what do we need to be doing collectively to be able to ensuring that we're actually being responsive in the best way possible. And we do believe that that's going to come through the equity scan and really examining cultural safety. And so with that, I want to thank the rest of my district team members for allowing me space tonight to talk a little bit about Indigenous education in our children and families. And I'm going to pass it over to Harold. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to continue this conversation with our district team and Pam Halverson. We are working on goal number 3, creating an inclusive and culturally responsive learning environment that will support all learners' physical and mental well-being. This has been a framework, or we have built a framework over the last number of years around our mental well-being and physical well-being in our district. And what you'll see through this presentation is what's been echoed again in the first 2 goals, is that we do see some gaps within the work that we're doing, and we need to go further to examine those gaps and to resource those gaps appropriately to support the work going deeper. I'm just going to give a quick overview into that framework that we've built. And the framework itself is focused on implementation of social emotional learning, physical literacy, and mental health literacy that improves the outcomes for our students. But what we do, or as we are building this framework, one of the things that we're looking to is the data to provide evidence that what we have built is actually having an impact where we want it to be. And as we clearly look at some of this data, we have some fantastic tools. Next slide, please, Andy. We have some fantastic tools from which we can gather data to support the work that we are doing. Deb has mentioned the EDI, the MDI, the McCreary Adolescent Health Survey for ages 12 to 19, and so much from the Ministry of Education, included the FSA, the Student Learning Survey, numeracy and literacy assessments, as well as our own district data that we've been collecting for a number of years as well to support that work. So we're going to come back to some of this data in our March presentation to start taking a look at what we've actually accumulated within our district that were those homemade, kind of, if I can use that phrase, framework pieces that we've been really focusing on lately. But I do want to talk just briefly about some of the data and some of the gaps that we're seeing within this data. And one of the big pieces that I think Deb spoke to a little bit ago as well was the idea that the data comes with this, or some of the data comes with its own complexity in terms of the relevance based on completion rates. We've noticed with many of these different data points that we aren't getting the participation in the tool to support that solid data. It's still good data, but it can be better. So we need to really focus our work and our resources on improving collection of that data and the use of these tools. I'll give you one example, the NDI. The MDI costs us approximately $20,000, where we get to survey 2 grades within our district, grade 4 and grade 6 this year, and the MDI is currently well underway. one of the things that we need to look to is how do we resource now, once we get that tool and once we've spent that money, how do we get the professional development to our staffs in our schools, one, to understand the data, and two, to really go deeper with it, understanding how we need to implement those action plans that support the work that we're doing. And you have to understand that to resource that, we're talking about 37 schools. And we want our staffs in all 37 schools to be able to look at that MDI data and really make good decisions about the work we're doing that supports mental health and physical literacy for all students within our district. Next slide, please, Andy. Here's another piece of data. This was very profound for me, and Tammy alluded to it in her conversation with the student learning survey data. This is the student learning survey data on mental health. And in this data, we can clearly see that when students are asked about their learning about their own mental health, they're not seeing that the work that we're doing and the resources that we're intending to support their mental health actually is on their radar, that they understand the explicitness of the work we're doing. So we have to go back now and go deeper with that. And part of the next piece that we're going to look at with Pam are some more of those gaps where we know we have to apply resource to support how, one, we plan for the district, but also two, how our particularly our students who are at the center of everything we do are really aware of that explicit work that we're doing to support their mental health and their physical literacy. Over to Pam, and next slide, please, Andy.
Thank you. So just to carry on from what Harold was speaking to, we know that the data is telling us, as you just saw, as that student learning survey data, we need to know more to make sure that students in our schools understand the work that's going on to really support them in understanding around their mental health and social emotional learning. And so just to put that in context and to talk about a support that we would have across the district for all students. As a district, we have supported the provincial or district implementation of a number of resources, Second Step at elementary schools, and mental health literacy, both in our middle schools, and we are just moving into our secondary schools. And so this is a resource that helps teachers in schools to really embed mental health supports into their teaching, into the environment in the school and in the classroom. We know that we want that resource to be used, those resources to be used in every school. However, as we look at this data from the EDI, we can see that there are some pockets within our school jurisdiction where we need to look at that data and we need to say, perhaps we need to do more, or we need to do something different, particularly in those areas that are showing up in the darker green that are more vulnerable. And so for us, that's that going back and really looking at the data and looking at how we align our budgets and our resources to say, what might it look like in those areas? So it could be who is coming to the table to engage in that conversation. And Shelley alluded to us really thinking about how we support our schools as a family sitting down at the table. Who are all of the people that need to be at that table and in those conversations? We know we need to be using data more closely with our schools to say, how is it going as we implement these resources? Perhaps it's more intentional collaboration time. So again, that's really guiding the work that we are doing as we look at how are we implementing those resources? How are we aligning them across the district? Andy, can you go to the next slide for me? Thanks. In addition, and I'm going to just go back to the MDI data, we can see the data, and this is grade 4 students on one side of the slide, and then grade 7 on the other. And we can see again, not something that we're really happy to see, truth be told, that kids are saying that the number of important adults at my school is decreasing as they get older. And so again, when we take that in account with all of the other data that we have, when we think about for supports for some students, so if we think more about tier 2 supports, what could we be doing? And what more do we need to be doing? And one thing that we know, and Shelley's also alluded to it, is we really need to support and expand the continuum of supports for students who are not engaged in school and therefore not engaged in learning. And so COVID has really shone a spotlight on that, but there are great opportunities that lie ahead of us. And one of the things we are doing as a district team is really looking at how we support transition. We are getting much better at really tracking who is attached to which student at which school. How are we supporting that student? What community services have been brought to the table to support that student? And what more needs to happen? As well, another thing that we are implementing on our mental health team, our district team, is including social workers as a part of our team. Social workers can add another layer of support to our district counselors and our district YFC and to the folks working in our schools. Social workers have the ability to work in homes and in communities, be far more connected to other ministries, and they can also work outside of some of those typical school hours. And so our goal in having social workers as a part of our team is that they are perhaps the bridge builder for some families back to the school system, back to all of us in education. And so how do we get those kids back in school and working then with our school teams and our district teams? Andy, if you can go to the next one. And then lastly, if we think about supports for a few students, children and youth in care are certainly a priority and a very vulnerable population that we know we need to prioritize and target some work. Shelley has already spoken briefly to this. We can certainly see the data on the screen. It does not paint a great picture for our Indigenous students who are children, youth in care, and may also have a ministry designation, and also for children and youth in care who may have a designation. So there is work that we need to do. And as such, we are developing and implementing a district standard of practice in terms of how do we gather data around our children, youth in care? How do we work with schools to support those children? And some of those things include revising the app that we use to track and gather data across the district, and also how we are working with our schools in terms of asking them to appoint a point person who is really that child's go-to in the school, looking at creating supporting success in school plans for these kids so that we really truly know them. And then again, looking at that through a very holistic lens and who else needs to be coming into that conversation to support those children. And so that work is underway. It has been a lot of collaboration. It's actually been a wonderful piece of work to be involved in. And so we know as we continue to go forward, that is something we will need to continue to be looking at our budget and perhaps increasing our budget to continue to grow this work. And next slide, please. So I wanted to say thank you on behalf of the team. I feel like we've just run a relay team and we've passed the torch without the baton. Way to go. I'll pass it back to Chair Painter, and thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And before we go to the round for questions, I just want to take a moment to highlight Deputy Superintendent Whitten, Associate Superintendent Colin Roberts, Harold Caldwell, Tammy Renyard, Shelley Naimi, Pam Halverson, all the amazing work that you're doing. Holy moly, what an incredible report that was. Fulsome, engaged, amazing work. I feel really proud, actually. I know there's a lot of work to be done, but you're doing amazing work, so thank you. I'm going to turn it over to our trustees for any questions that they might have. Trustee Ferris.
Sure. I don't know that I'm looking for an answer to my questions, but I will be interested to see how COVID has impacted our effort to, help our Aboriginal students feel more comfortable in school. And it's really distressing for me to think of the students who are caught up in this unfortunate situation. But I think it's something that we need to know eventually before we move on to how this has affected a cohort of students in our district.
Thank you, Trustee Ferris. I don't know if Shelley, you want to take that on, or if you just want to maybe reflect on that a little bit, that may be helpful.
Very appreciate those sentiments, Trustee Ferris. We too are very concerned and interested in looking at our data about how COVID has had an impact on all of our students. The FSA data, of course, will be very important this year on overall how we have done through the COVID component. Attendance is a critical one for our students who are on reserve on the nations, and then the linkage to students, and we are keeping track as we've pivoted for many of those students to provide support for our students on reserve. So all those components are coming forward, and we're happy to put that together and provide that for trustees as we move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Green. I've got Chair Waters and then Trustee Duncan.
Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for the presentation. It's a lot of information, and it's really exciting to see this alignment starting to track through, I think it was the data story we talked about. I love that wording. Thank you, Shelley. I think you shared that. I'm having a little bit of difficulty understanding the student learning survey data and what it means on pages 28 and 35. It's like maybe the top column, the top row is maybe missing in terms of what those various columns mean. I don't know if it's possible for someone to share a little bit about what that data is telling us. Just I want to fully appreciate what you've laid out for us, and that one was a bit of a question mark for me.
Deputy Superintendent Winton, I don't know if you wanted to take that.
Sure, I can. Yes, apologies. The top row should reflect the grades. So in the left hand, it's grade 4. And going across left to right, it's then 7, 10, and 12. And what the numbers indicate, if it's green, it shows that we're above provincial averages. And then the smaller number shows by what percent. So with the Student Learning Survey Assessment 1, grade 4 is 37%. And that's 1% higher than provincial average. If it's red, then it's the percentage below provincial.
Okay, thank you. That clears it up. I wasn't sure if I was missing something, but yes, that row was just missing. Thank you so much for all of the great information. I'll be digesting it for a while and excited to hear more as we move forward.
Thank you, Chair Waters. Trustee Duncan, and then Trustee Rob Painter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the team for the great teamwork on display and all the information. I'm reflecting back to your presentation to the committee earlier in the year, or was that December? The months are flying by, but and what you've brought today, there's certainly a lot going on, and I can see that the team is really picking up momentum and really running with our new strat plan. I do have a few questions. There is a lot of information here, and I think it's going to be great food for thought over the coming months as we discuss this more and more at committee. As the plan develops. I wanted to go back to the FSA for a minute and look at some of the, well, I guess the participation rates, but the results. So let's put the participation rate to the side for a moment and just look at the results. And what I'm seeing is that the results aren't terribly high for any of our students' population. And I'm wondering, you know, in terms of reading and numeracy, what other district assessments besides the FSA help us to formulate a view of how our students are doing around reading and numeracy? Are there assessments that we're doing that can help fill in those gaps for us?
Deputy Superintendent Winton, I'll turn it over to you.
Probably a team response on this one, and I look to Tammy Renyard. Across the district, we do have other common assessments, but I would say a gap is the fact that we don't have something standard in every cohort or every grade. So many schools use benchmarks, many schools use Pontus and Fennell, lots of different assessment tools, but the FSA for a provincial standardized test is one that would be used and should be used across all grade 4, 7, and grade 4 and 7, and then 10 and 12 for the literacy and numeracy assessments. Anything else, Tammy?
No, I think that's it. Other than using report card data, we aren't looking at other common assessments currently. Some schools are using different pieces. We're piloting an assessment at Shoreline right now, focusing on a group of students who showed in FSA that were struggling. And so we are piloting a common assessment with grade 6, 7 there, and looking at using it with grade 8 coming up this month.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. Trustee Duncan, a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wondered, Chair, if you want us, I have a few questions, but I want to let my other trustee colleagues have a turn first. So do you want me just to hold my other questions until we go around again, or?
Why don't we go for 2 for you, and then we'll hop over to Trustee Rob Painter. We'll do 2 for 2.
Sounds good. Okay. And so I guess building on that, I did have a follow-up. I just wondered what the report card data tells us. So about numeracy and literacy, if it's possible to say that off the top of your heads. I appreciate there might be something that you go away and think about, but I'm wondering what, if there isn't any common assessment other than the FSA, and where it sounds like we're doing some work to build some pockets of common assessment, what does the report card data tell us about how our students are doing around numeracy and literacy? Does it align with what we're seeing from the FSA results that we do have? Around that 60 to 50%, rates for a lot of the students in our district.
Deputy Superintendent Whitten.
Again, I will look at Tammy, and we also have David Hovis. Most of our district team is on the call, so I'd like just to interject that we have a fantastic district team who've joined us this evening. So we have lots of knowledge and expertise on the call or on the meeting tonight.
And I don't have that data available to know. Some of the feedback we have is that can be challenging, is that teachers will often say even classroom to classroom, the way folks are assessing may not be the same, let alone school to school. So sometimes what's tricky about looking at report card data versus something like FSA is it's not standardized in any way. And sometimes it can feel like we're measuring apples and oranges. And so that part has been tricky. And even we find with benchmarks and things like that, folks can be looking at an instructional level versus an independence level. So sometimes even in that data, it can be difficult. So I know that even though FSA can be controversial, it is one that we can lean into in terms of what it looks like across the province so that it is more standardized.
Okay, let's, Superintendent Green, please.
Just wanted to give a very brief follow-up. We are very fortunate to have an expert, which is Tammy, who knows the FSA, the design of that assessment incredibly well, and will help us to be able to utilize all aspects of it in the numeracy, literacy, writing and reading components, but not only help our parents and students understand, but our teachers get a little bit more usefulness out of the FSA data, and certainly for our district. And so the uptick, we're trying to provide as much information for our parents and families, our staff, as we possibly can as we move forward on the value of that tool, and hopefully get greater uptick as we move forward.
Thank you, Superintendent Green. We'll go over to Trustee Rob Painter for a bit, and then I just want to make sure we keep the questions tight and focused on the topic at hand, which is opportunities and gaps with the district team. Thank you.
So, for as long as I can remember, I've been harping on the need for data, and so I am grateful to see so much work going into this. I also appreciate that when you're trying to speak to the district as a whole, it's often necessary to generalize the presentation to a level that fits within the time allotted. But having said that, for me, FSAs, I think, could be, under different circumstances, an exceptional tool. I remember actually getting into the weeds about how to interpret the different elements of the FSA and how that can inform improved instruction, blah, blah, blah. There's a ton of components in there. And I hope at some point in time, if it continues to exist, that we do make use of that, because the teachers that I know personally, very small percentage of the ones we have in this district, don't have access to it or don't use it in that form.
I'm sorry, Trustee Painter. I don't mean to jump in, but we're not debating the FSA here. So if we can just circle back to the opportunities and gaps part of the presentation, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, the biggest concern I have about the FSA is that using.
I'm sorry, Trustee Painter.
Okay, I am speaking about the data, sir. I honestly am.
All due respect, I'm the chair. We're not debating the FSA tonight. We're debating.
I'm not trying to debate the FSA. I'm debating the use of the FSA in this presentation, and I would like to understand to what extent we are depending upon that information to make the decisions moving forward. My concern is that at a grade 4 level, as we shift, as I've been told, from learning to read to reading to learn, when we have a significant proportion of our population that still isn't mastering reading, and yet we're now pushing them into a situation where they're now having to use that reading skill at whatever level to then develop other aspects of their learning, and yet they're still having to follow up and learn how to read effectively. Starting our assessments at grade 4 or relying on that to any great extent really concerns me, because in my mind, we're missing out on significant opportunities for early intervention, for tracking challenges along the way, to making sure that we actually are targeting these kids in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2 at the latest, to actually get on top of it and understand what's going on. Now, as I said,
sorry, I'm sorry, Trustee
Painter,
I'm just going to cut in. Do you have a question for staff who have presented tonight on opportunities and gaps? Because I would like to circle back to that if we could, please.
Okay, what other measures are being used to fill those gaps? I understand in March we're going to learn a little bit more about the school district stuff, but what I'm hearing right now is we have inconsistent standards between schools, that the FSA is one of the few standards we have, but it really concerns me that that's only coming available at 4. So what do we have to fill the gaps leading up to grade 4?
Okay, Superintendent Green.
I can start us off a little bit. The EDI is a very important beginning tool. It tells about students and where they are in developmental program before they even get into kindergarten. Early literacy programs, as you've heard speaking with benchmarks, tells about our early literacy, how we are doing, and that moves forward into the FSA. All the developmental components that we do under those pieces on early learning fall into place before they get to the FSA.
Sorry, Deputy Superintendent Whitten, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's also a fantastic night because we have also Carrie Nickerson and Charmaine Short who will be presenting on early years. And so you'll hear clearly from them the interventions that we're looking at addressing and perhaps some of the gaps, but also some of the exciting initiatives we've begun.
That's great. Okay, I see VCPAC Christine Payne has a question. Go ahead, Christine.
Hi, thanks very much.
Oh, Christine, you're on mute.
We played this game a couple times. I want to thank the team for presenting this informative package tonight. I just had a question about an app, I believe, that was developed by the district for Craig Flower School, and it tied in with 2 nations and their chiefs, and there was a reporting for each student for each nation. It went back to the chief, and it involved numeracy and literacy, I believe, and then also attendance. And I'm wondering if this app is still being used and if the district is considering using it in any other way across the district for other Indigenous learners or other groups at all. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. We'll go to Deputy Superintendent Whitten.
Yeah, as I mentioned, great question. Thank you. We have David Hovis, who is working on this learning app or literacy app as we know it.
And
hi there.
District
Hi,
Principal
everyone.
Hovis, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, just a note that the learning app is continuing. We're continuing that work. working with the team over at Craig Flower and one of the teachers, learning support teachers, Maria, over there. And so we've just had an opportunity to meet with our tech team and took some of the feedback that the Craig Flower team has provided us and doing some adaptations and modifications to the app. It's a learning app. And we're going to be offering in the spring an opportunity for school teams to come along and learn a little bit more about that. And so schools that are interested in using that app, it will be available to them.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Shelley.
Sure. And I just want to support that just because really where that app came from as an initiation was a response that our school district had when the nations came forward and said, we really want to know a little bit more about what's happening for our kiddos, right? And what does that look like? And so the partnership was really authentic and it was meaningful. And it was the first time that we fell into the conversation really about examining data and using data to look at results for their children. And so I think that it has been a lovely relationship between both the nations and the Craig Flower School and the teachers involved to be able to look at that story and that data story to be able to say, how do we improve outcomes? And so I just wanted to compliment David in the work that he's doing with continuing that, because I do think that we can stretch it as an example across our team. So thank you for your time.
That's great, Shelley. Thank you for tossing that in there with David's piece. I think it's important that we add that to the conversation. I'm noting the time, and we do still have 3 items on the agenda. So I'm going to take one more question. I know Trustee Duncan had a couple pieces, but Trustee Duncan, if we can maybe narrow it down to one more question, that would be great, please.
There's so much to get into, but I can narrow it down to one question if asked. And I wanted to just pick up on slide 40. So it's on page, it's not slide 40, sorry, it's slide 37 on page 40 of the pack-up. And I just wondered, it references the development of and implementation of a district standard of practice. And I just wondered if there's a plan in place already, or if you're starting to build a plan about who would be responsible for developing that standard of practice, and whether you have some initial plans on how that might be rolled out in the future.
Sure, I can jump in on that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
And Shelley, feel free to jump in as well. We are working, so Shelley, Mimi, and I are working with a number of our district colleagues on that work, as well as colleagues from MCFT, colleagues from delegated agencies. And we are also working fairly closely with both Sooke and Saanich school districts, because we know that many of our children and youth in care are very transient and move across all 3 districts. And so again, what we have done is looking at the research, looking at recent documents that have come out from the ministry, and truth be told, looking across Canada at what are the best practices out there that are really supporting our children and youth in care. And so that work is well underway. It started a number of years ago. Harold and team had been leading that work. And so now we're just kind of moving it forward. Shelley and I have come into that work together this year. And so we have, as I mentioned, we've made some revisions to our app so that it paints a more holistic picture of students. We've added in some additional planning pieces at the school. And also we've provided some more opportunities for school staff to engage with us through some Zoom sessions around what should we be looking for and recording and all those types of things. And then going forward, we continue to partner with ministry staff, because at the same time we want to help our school staff know how to better support our students. We want to work with our colleagues in other places to help them understand how their social workers could also be working better with our schools. Shelley, was there anything more you wanted to add to that?
No, I think the entire team that's working on it has done an excellent and incredible job. I think really when we develop a standard of practice and we lean into what our data is telling us. So if our data is telling us that children and youth in care in our school district are not on parity, then what do we need to know to do differently? And I think this was the attempt to be able to do that, Trustee Duncan, right? And I'm really excited, because I think when we look at partnering, and doesn't again become an isolation, right? It becomes this family role. We take this on and we put that student learning experience in the middle. And so I think that we're really making an attempt to be able to enhance eyes on our children, right? And knowing who they are and what the data is telling us about them, and bringing the right people to the table. So, you know, part of our involvement for Indigenous education is that even though we're only 8% of the overall student population, we have over 50% of children and youth in care in our district. And so we feel that being a part of this conversation is relevant to us, and that we can all benefit from being a part of that together. So I think as it continues to grow, and Pam and team and all, right, as all of us on this screen here, right, I think we're going to see the impact of our changing results for our kids. So we're moving in the right direction, and we're being led by the strat plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad I asked that question.
Very good question. Yeah, very good question. Thank you, Trustee Duncan. And so thank you to the whole team. Thank you for bringing to life the work that you're doing. It is amazing. It is ongoing, and it is vital. So thank you very much. We'll now move on to C3 District Team Update. District Vice Principal Carrie Nickerson and District Teacher Charmaine Short. It is over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Trustee Painter. Andy, if you are happy to be our slide wizard once again, thank you. I just want to thank everyone for hanging in there and for the opportunity to share this evening. As Trustee Painter mentioned, I'm presenting tonight with my colleague, Charmaine Short, and we are here to share an update on the work that's happening in the early years in our district as part of the larger district team. And I'm very fortunate because I've had the opportunity to be involved in the early years for the last few years, and we have a lot of early learning initiatives in our district that continue from year to year and are very successful. But tonight, we really want to take this opportunity to update you about some new learning supports that began in September. And before I get Andy to change the slide, it might be nice just to take a minute, and that photo on there is of it's from a classroom at Tillicum in kindergarten. And this was one of the great resources that Charmaine shared with the team there around identity. And you can see, I think the identity of those students comes through in their PEG people that they made. So go ahead, Andy, you can go to the next slide. So I just want to start by grounding our work in the strategic plan as well as the district team's operational plan. And in line with the strategic plan, we consider our early year supports through the lens of wanting to create inclusive and culturally responsive learning environments for our youngest learners. And the new supports that we're sharing about tonight probably are most directly related to strategy 2 of the district team operational plan, which is the one that you can see on there, developing and supporting high quality, culturally responsive and equitable learning opportunities and resources in order to close those achievement gaps for all learners. So this year there was some additional funding allocated to the early years through the Equity of Opportunity supplemental funds that came to the district. And so we had an opportunity to really look at trying some new things, maybe some different things. We wanted to build on what was already working, and then we wanted to add strength where we thought it would make the most difference for children. So in order to do this, we had to consider a few things. We wanted to find out what's going on for our learners, their families, and our school-based staff. And we needed to know what our colleagues in schools felt they needed to really move this work forward and close those gaps that we're focused on. So as we started to plan the supports, we started to look at, this has been mentioned a few times tonight, that early development instrument or EDI data, because we know that not all of our neighborhoods are the same, and we do want to be responsive. So when you look at the overall vulnerability scale, they have a measure for kindergarten students who are vulnerable in one or more areas. As Deb mentioned, it questions about 5 different developmental areas. And the Tillicum and Quadra neighborhoods have a vulnerability index of 44%. And that was a significant increase from the previous time our district had participated in this data collection. View Royal and Craigflower schools also had a meaningful increase in vulnerability at 39%. Many of our other neighborhoods are stable, but we do have some schools that are in neighborhoods that have high levels of vulnerability. So we wanted to pay attention to that. We also considered the patterns and trends, and we did a lot of that by working across departments to determine which schools had high numbers of children who in kindergarten who require additional supports. So for example, we talked to Simon. He was able to share with us which schools have the highest levels of English language learners. Sean and Pam were able to share the schools that had high numbers of students who needed additional learning supports. And Shelley and Craig could talk to us about the numbers of Indigenous learners. And through this whole process, a list of schools began to emerge. So then the next step, we connected with the admin teams at those schools, and that was in July. And we asked them those same questions that I talked about at the beginning. You know, what are the areas of strength at your school? Where do you want to add strength? And what do you need in order to do this work? And so we met with them in July. And then we looked at also what was happening in other settings. So we wanted to see, you know, what are other school districts doing? What else is happening in community and across the province? Oh, Andy, you know what? I forgot to tell you to advance the slide. So I'm talking about the next slide. Yeah, I think I already talked about that one too. One more. Oh, no, go back. I wanted to see everyone's faces, so I made the slide small and the faces big.
I'm sorry, Kerry, I was jumping ahead earlier, so I'm not going to do it again.
Are you listening, Andy? This is a test. No, okay, no, I think we're good. We can go to the next slide. Great. So one of the strengths that we have in our school district is the team of early childhood educators that staff our BC early learning programs or our Strong Start centers. And just as a reminder, Strong Start is a free ministry-funded drop-in program for children from birth right up until they start school. They can come with their caregiver, it's free, and they're staffed by licensed ECEs. We have 6 centers in our district. You can see the schools where they're located at on the slide. And so we wanted to build on that. So one of the things we started this year is, for the first time in our school district, we've added ECE hours to support in primary classrooms. So the 6 schools that already had Strong Start centers received an extra 12.5 hours of ECE time per week to be in K and grade 1 classrooms. And then we had Quadrant Tillicum without a Strong Start center, but we wanted to add some time there due to their diverse populations. So we added 16 hours each week at those 2 schools. And ECE hours are a direct support for children. And I know Tammy mentioned, like, we know that we have to put the supports close to the children who need them. So ECE hours are a direct support for children, and they're also a support for teachers because they come with different backgrounds and different lenses that they can put on the children in their care.
Do you want me to move slides forward, Kerry?
Yeah, can you move forward? It's so hard not doing my own slides. I got to learn to let go. Okay, so yes, we have the ECE hours, and then we also decided to hire 2 full-time district support teachers. So Charmaine, who's here with me tonight, is our early years district support teacher. We also have Trina Black, who's our Indigenous early years support teacher. Trina's actually working out of George Day Elementary 3 days a week. And then she has flexibility on the other 2 days to provide support across the district. We also set aside money for release time to bring teams of educators together for professional development, and also to purchase classroom supplies to support the implementation of things that they had learned about in their sessions together. So we have the support teachers, the Pro-D sessions, and the supplies being a direct support to teachers and the ECEs. But we're already hearing amazing stories of how these supports are making a difference for children in the classrooms. So by aligning budgets across all departments, we were able to put together this comprehensive plan of supports that for both students and educators. Okay, Andy, I'm ready for the next slide. You've been hearing a lot about the early learning framework tonight, and it's a Ministry of Education document. By the way, if any trustees would like to have a print copy of this document, I have lots. Just send me an email or let someone know and we'll get it to you. It is a really wonderful document because it's a guide for educators working with children in BC from birth right up to grade 3. And it directly connects with the K-12 curriculum as well as core competencies. But what it really does is it brings to life the pedagogies and philosophies about what it means to create culturally responsive learning environments that are inclusive for all children. It resists pedagogies that perpetuate legacies of colonization, and it really strives to contribute to reconciliation. It strengthens the vision of inclusive spaces and practices for children, and it holds the view of learning and being as a holistic process. And so you can hear the Indigenous worldview just coming to life in some of these philosophies and principles. It's not a document that gives teachers specific how-tos. It doesn't suggest a right way to work with children and families. Rather, it's intended to inspire approaches that are relevant and respectful of local communities. So given its alignment with all the goals of our district strategic plan, it's the perfect anchor text for all of our work in the early years. And we have been leaning into this document really heavily this year. All of our professional learning sessions include nuggets from the early learning framework, and all of the resources and suggestions that we provide for educators are really focused on bringing the principles in there to life. Okay, Andy, next slide. And finally, I just want another consideration is the correlation that you can see on this graph about what's happening in our society in Canada. This was shared by Jane Bertrand at one of our early years provincial meetings. She's a Canadian researcher in the field of early learning. And you can really see on this graph the correlation between free play opportunities for children and mental health challenges for Canadian children since the 1960s. So there's been a growing body of research to suggest the positive effects of free play on young children's development. So at school, we want to ensure that all of our learners have access to engaging, playful learning to help them reach their full potential, both personally and academically. So if we want to do that, we definitely need to provide supports for primary educators who are trying to shift their practice to be more play-based. As a direct response to the societal trends illustrated on this graph, we decided to focus the new supports on increasing opportunities for students and educators to learn through play. And evidence suggests that this will enhance their social emotional well-being too. So Andy, for the next slide, I'm going to turn things over to Charmaine, and she's going to actually tell you a little bit more about what these supports look and feel like in classrooms.
Thank you, Carrie. And thank you to all of you for your interest and for your wonderful listening. So one new support that Carrie mentioned earlier is that we have early childhood educators in our primary classrooms. It's exciting, and we wanted to provide support to help foster those relationships and the partnerships, being that that's a new initiative in our district. So the 8 school teams are participating in a 6-part collaboration series focused on how early learning educators and teachers can work together and leverage their expertise and passions to support students' personal and academic learning. In our last session, we had each partnership share stories and experiences of their time together in the classroom, and it was pretty special to see how their relationships and partnerships are evolving and enhancing student learning and making a difference for children. Throughout the series, we're gathering feedback from the early childhood educators, as well as the teachers, and on how their collaboration efforts are having the most meaningful impact, so we can continually respond to that and grow from their experiences. And in addition to the series, we also respond to requests for professional learning series sessions at schools for school teams, as well as offering co-teaching experiences and sharing resources, planning with individual teachers and teams. And so to date, so far, we've directly supported 12 schools with these types of requests, and that includes approximately 40 individual teachers, as well as the teams who are participating in our partnership series. Thank you, Andy. Can I also get you to, oh, good job. Yes, it's the joy, just feel the joy. Early years is such a joyful place to be. And we've heard it so much tonight that play is sort of at the core and the heart of all that we do with young children to make the biggest impact. And we know the benefits of play are countless. So playful learning is inclusive as it offers multiple entry points for varied engagements and experiences and forms of expression for all of our learners. And as educators, we really want to be intentional about the learning that we can inspire through the play. So on this slide, you can see some examples of a fluff inquiry that we started sharing with teachers this year. And the aim of the inquiry really is just to provide a tangible example of play-based ways that teachers can offer opportunities to nurture social and emotional competencies and also enhance literacy skills, how everything can weave together to provide a joyful experience. And I really just can't get enough of the little photo with the two children introducing their fluffs to each other, because I really think that speaks to how the fluff brings meaning to each individual child. I can just hear the conversation in my mind. And so the little fellow there, he might look like a pom-pom with little eyes to you, but to our learners, it really becomes so much more. And the project offers just multiple entry points for children to engage with their learning in a personal way, and the teacher just guides along the path to where how it might unfold. So I'm so happy to report that there are now over 800 fluffs living in classrooms throughout School District 61. And so I would watch my step if I was you. And we know that our efforts in the early years have such a significant impact as learners move through the years. We've heard it countless times tonight. So research continually affirms that students who benefit from social and emotional learning programming in their early years reap the gains all the way through their schooling, including improved academic achievement, better attitudes about themselves, others, the school. Certainly helps to manage stress and mental health challenges. Limitless impact just from introducing play and social emotional competencies. So this is just only one example of a resource that we might share with educators to support the infusion of play. And basically always we're just trying to figure ways to nurture the heart and the mind through our playful learning. And Andy, if you don't mind keeping, oh, good job. So equity, we understand that one important facet of equity is access. So we're continually asking ourselves, how can we provide supports and connect with all of our primary educators? So we've thought about that, and one way is everything that we create is saved in a way that we could easily share it with other schools. And so when we do a learning session with one school, we can record that and make it accessible to all. We're in the process of building an early years website where resources, recordings, and opportunities can be housed and accessed by educators at all schools. And we are working on a podcast, as well as using social media platforms as other ways that we can connect and support all educators. I think most importantly, as we foster relationships ourselves, we're able to connect educators at one school, knowing what their interest is, and connecting them with educators at other schools when we know that they're pursuing similar learning interests. And we started a quarterly newsletter, and that's another channel, another way to reach out and support our educators. So as you can see, support comes in all shapes and sizes, and we're really just constantly evolving and asking ourselves how we can best support everyone and connect with all. And we'll continue to explore those ways, and we'll be so happy to share how this evolves in the future. So thank you so much, and I'm going to pass it back to the wonderful Carrie Nickerson.
Andy, if you could just go to the last slide. So this photo on the slide was taken from the early learning framework, and I just love it because that notion of infinite possibilities, and I think that's what we have ahead of us in SD 61 in the early years. There's many things for us to still consider. I think we probably want to continue to monitor the changing demographics in our city so we make sure that we have the supports where they're most needed. Given the indicators of success we've already seen with having ECEs in primary classrooms, we might want to consider how we might be able to expand that to more children. And also the amazing number of people that we've been able to reach already in this school year, especially given it's a COVID year and it was a bit of a slower start. The number of teachers we've worked directly with just having Charmaine and Trina a little bit of the time, who can plan Pro D, but also are available to go into classrooms and work side by side with teachers and children. I think we should consider how we might be able to expand that work by adding similar district positions going forward. We're going to continue to strengthen and expand our collaboration with early year service providers and community and other school districts. So there's still lots of work to be done, but I think we have a lot to celebrate in our school district. I'm really proud of the progress we've made in the early years over the last few years. And so we're very thrilled that we were able to come and just continue that conversation with you tonight. We're happy to answer questions, but I would just like to take this opportunity to turn it back over to Trustee Painter as chair.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Charmaine. What a wonderful presentation. I challenge everybody to go to that very first slide and pick up the character that best represents you. I've already picked out mine, and it is the one with the little hair. And I see Carrie has a little...
I have my fluff right here at my desk.
Wonderful.
And Ryan, can I just say one last thing? Yeah. I just really, really want to say a heartfelt thank you to Charmaine Short. She's a fabulous educator. I'm so lucky I get to work with her every day. And I just am constantly inspired by her strength-based approach, her positivity, and her academic expertise as well. She knows the theory inside and out, but she also knows how to play. So thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Carrie. And I'm learning from the best, so appreciate that.
We have a remarkable team. My very brief time as an ECE teacher overseas was also focused on play. So this resonated a lot with me, Charmaine. It was very good. Thank you. Do we have any questions from folks around the virtual table? Trustee Rob Painter and then Trustee Duncan.
Thank you so much, Charmaine and Carrie. That was fantastic, and it feeds so much into some of the angst that I was probably expressing earlier. So, thank you again for that. Like here, I can see such direct linkages to just some of the community information in the EDI reports. So this is one where it's so easy to see the connections and see the work on the ground. So, you know, maybe I'm reading into it, but I kind of think that's where it came from. It helps me so much to understand why we're doing what we're doing. I recognize that Strong Start is about getting kids ready for school. There's no assessment or evaluation, but at least to my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but is there any way that you anticipate getting a sense of how effective Strong Start is in terms of preparedness when the kids do arrive at kindergarten and move forward?
Well, I think it's, as you are correct that there's no assessments at Strong Start. I think the strength of the Strong Start programming is through relationship. It's an opportunity for families to come into schools. It's an opportunity for families to experience a little bit of what an early, like just very short, obviously we have infants in Strong Start, so circle time is, you know, multi-age, but there are little bits of what school will be like. But it's also just a really safe place for families to come and meet other families and make those connections in community that really support not just the child, but the entire family. And what we do hear, many stories, is about how it's so reassuring for those parents when their child does start kindergarten because they already know somebody in the school, or they already have had a bit of a school experience. And to be honest with you, the COVID pandemic has just really highlighted for me how much those 6 ECEs are connected to families across our community. It's been incredible the number of families who they have stayed in contact with through emails, private Facebook groups that they've set up to continue online programming, food security initiatives. It's amazing. So they definitely, I think the strength of it is really through the relationships.
Thank you, Carrie. That's wonderful. Trustee Painter, or is that good or?
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Trustee Duncan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, that was an exciting presentation. I can feel the energy and the enthusiasm through Zoom. And I love the play-based learning. My own son went through preschool that was very committed to play-based learning, but also to outdoor education. And so it piqued my interest. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you're connecting that play-based philosophy to outdoor opportunities to learn outdoor for the kids.
You want to take that, Charmaine?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Thank you for your interest. And certainly outdoor learning was actually the first learning session that we started with this school year for elementary teams. And reason being, first of all, as you say, it's a wonderful way to bring natural play into our schooling. And also with the COVID year, outdoor learning became a really important option for many educators. And certainly with the Indigenous learning that we're constantly trying to weave through, we were able to work with Shelley's team and weave in those important learnings into the learning session. And I think as we talked about access, we now have that learning session housed so other educators can access it. And throughout that learning session, we also offered it for our Strong Start educators. Throughout that session, we just sort of promoted how inquiry and enhancing student interests from their own curiosities as you're out in the woods, as you're out in the forest, and what the questions they're asking and how you can take those questions and create limitless possibilities for play and learning. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. And any other questions from our stakeholders or any folks around the table? And if not, Just want to leave with saying thank you so much, Charmaine and Carrie. Infinite possibilities. Equity means access for all. Dynamite. And don't forget your little fluffs. Those are perfect. I feel like I want to make some for everybody now. That's dynamite. But mine wouldn't look nearly as good as theirs.
I'm sure we can arrange for everyone to get a fluff.
I would have loved to provide them to all of you this evening, and sadly, I don't know how to transport them through the screen, but I'm thinking of you all, so thank you for your interest.
Thank you both. Really incredible report. Thank you so much. Now we'll move on to C4, Police Liaison Officer Ad Hoc Committee Update, and I will turn the floor over to Trustee Duncan. Trustee Duncan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a brief update from the committee. The update is in the form of a memo in the pack up at page 55. For those of you who have not had an opportunity to read it yet, just highlight very briefly the fact that we have met a few times. In fact, our third meeting occurs this week. It is a very committed and passionate group of committee members, very diverse in its membership. We are, again, just for those that are maybe not as familiar with the work of the committee, we are tasked with determining what, if any concerns there may be with these district police liaison officer program. And we're tasked with developing recommendations as required on what changes, including cessation of the program, should be made to make the program more valuable for our school community. And so in the memo, you'll find a few more details about what we've been up to, what we are looking forward to during our next meeting at the end of this week, and a commitment to come back and provide further updates as the work of the committee evolves. I'm certainly happy to take questions. I'll leave that to the chair. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. Are there any questions from the floor on Trustee Duncan's update from a very busy and fulsome ad hoc committee? Any questions? Seeing and hearing none. Just want to make sure I'm catching everybody on my screen here. I think we're good. All right. Thank you very much, Trustee Duncan, for the update. We will now move on to the Equity C5 Equity Committee Report, Superintendent Green and District Principal David Hovis. Superintendent Green, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be very brief, as trustees will remember, on January 27th, as you can see in the committee report, the motion was put forward to go to the Equity Committee to look at reading recovery being a possible intervention available to all schools across our district. The committee spent a great deal of very fulsome time looking at literacy structures across our district and what would be important for all schools to be looking for a comprehensive literacy program. Spent a lot of time looking at what the district is doing, what they could be doing, but ultimately came up with a main framework at the end of what would be required for all district schools to be looking at a grade 1 early literacy program that extended through elementary school time. And so you'll see under the committee report that a school would need to be looking at learning sessions K-1 in early literacy intervention, collaborative inquiry, team time, literacy in all areas for grade 4 to 5 side-by-side literacy, and supports both English and French immersion, and that includes resources. Schools can decide and do decide what programs they're looking for that will advance and enhance their school literacy program. And every school is in a different stage along the continuum. It roughly takes 4 years to build a comprehensive early literacy program in a building. And many schools use different programs, use different supports, use different people, and different Pro-D. And the school district has worked over the last 3 years to try and build that support in place to find out where schools were at and where they wanted to go. Ultimately, the Equity Committee came forward with the fact that it's more important to be funding schools along their literacy continuum. And so what would it cost if we were a school that's just beginning our literacy journey in the first year, looking at Pro-D, programming, supports, materials, supports within the school. And we came up with a 4-year overall plan for a school to be looking at that they're supported by the district. And if every school was doing that in a given year, what would trustees have to look for budgeting on a school programming literacy continuum? And so we've provided the motion that would allow trustees to go through their budget program and possibly put a beginning step of money towards literacy, where schools could, if they chose Coach Approach, or they chose Jolly Phonics, or they chose to do reading recovery, they would have the funds and the support to be able to do that. And so for trustees to look at this motion and this plan over a 4-year continuum that would provide strong, deep pedagogical understanding of literacy in all of our elementary schools over a 4-year continuum. And so we've brought forward through the committee this motion to be put forward for trustees to consider.
Thank you, Chair, and or Chair Superintendent Green. It's apparently getting late. I did want to provide time. We have District Principal David Hovis here as well. David, if you wanted to add anything, you're more than welcome to, or I can turn it over to the floor. Okay, great. Just for my piece as chair of the equity committee, this was, and also the original mover of the motion, I was really happy with the engagement we had from District Principal Hovis and the rest of the equity committee. I think we had some really engaging, insightful conversation around how to make literacy available across the district. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think it was certainly helpful for me as a trustee to get that feedback and see different schools, different principals need different things. So I think that was certainly very helpful for me. I'm going to turn it over to the floor. We do have a motion, but before we move the motion, were there any questions or comments that trustees had around the table? And I see Trustee Whitaker waving. Yes, I see Trustee Whitaker. And then we'll go to Trustee Duncan.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. My questions are about the 4-year budget, because I don't actually remember discussing this at committee. So I'm trying to understand, how did we come up with this? Specifically, you mean we've got 530,000 one year, 575,000 one year, and then we dramatically dropped to 282,000 and then to 267,000. So my first thought was that a typo? But perhaps not. And yeah, I guess, I don't know what I missed, but I don't remember discussing this at committee. So I'm looking for some feedback on what's going on with, why do we cut our funding in half in the last 2 years?
So I can turn it over to David, who will give trustees another overview. It was in the slide presentation that he presented on a 4-year continuum. So David, if you want to give us a brief overview of what happens in each of those 4 years.
Yeah,
David,
so again, it was a 4-year continuum, Trustee Whitaker. And so there's an opportunity again in that year one where we're really targeting all schools. Again, schools that want to opt into this, there would be an opportunity for a much thorough process in terms of engaging in a number of sessions with our team. And as it kind of works down, there's a focus on in year 2, a focus on with grade 4s and 5 students. And as we get down to year 3 and 4, then again, there's opportunity to engage in those years, but it's fewer sessions in those years of 3 and 4 as schools build on their comprehensive literacy program. So again, that's kind of a 4-year plan where there's building from year to year to year on those programs.
So you're investing in the front end and reaping the benefits at the end. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Trustee Duncan and then Trustee Rob Painter.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, thank you very much for the memo and the recommended motion. I did have a couple of questions. I just wanted to ground my understanding of what's being suggested. And for me, it's by reference to when the motion was originally brought through the committee. I recall that the motion was brought to the committee in order to open up the potential for other schools to take advantage of reading recovery programming, in particular other schools where, because of what I understood to be significant costs associated with having a reading recovery program at your school, that not all schools were taking the opportunity that may have wanted to because the funding was coming out of that school-based budget. So assuming that my recollection of the rationale behind the motion some time ago is correct, I'm just wanting to clarify. So what's being recommended is that the board allocate money to all elementary schools, not necessarily for reading recovery, but just to implement whatever reading and literacy program supports that they wish. And then further, I guess the supplementary question I have is, in what way does this budget, so the 4-year projected budget for the 28 elementary schools, in what way does that differ from the budget that they already get as a group of schools to support literacy?
So at this point,
Superintendent Green, I turn over to you.
Sorry,
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I must be getting tired. It would be a comprehensive focus on literacy developmental program. You may be a school, and we certainly have them, that have already put budgeting and time into that development, and you are past a year or two, but you haven't spent time looking at your grade 4 or 5 and how to support the literacy component there. And so you might understand the depth of what you need to be doing to create that comprehensive literacy program, and be stepping in on a later time in that scheduling. So that the amount of money that Oakland's Elementary may need may not be at a level 1 to begin with. It certainly will be on the continuum. Ultimately, our schools are deciding what they want to be doing for a literacy program. Reading recovery tends to work with students one-to-one, as you've heard. You have the ability to get through 5 to 6 students in a given year who may require the responsiveness of that program. And you may be in a school where your literacy results are into the norm and actually excel. And so as a staff, you may sit and look at the needs of your kids, the continuum of where you are at a literacy program, and realize, most of our kids are coming in and they are ready to read. We don't have a high needs, but we do have a number of small students. We're going to put our time and money more into a reading recovery type of program because we have more students that need a one-to-one supports on them. And this would be a budget that the district would be giving to you. But ultimately, we're going to have to work with our schools to, if trustees are going to budget for this, so that they work with our learning team to let us know where they are at on the literacy continuum, what they want to do, and the budget they need to build in that comes from the different district level, if trustees indeed choose to be putting their money there this coming year in our budget season.
And Trustee Duncan, if I can just clarify, when I originally moved this motion last year, it was with perhaps a naive understanding that all schools wanted this and just couldn't afford it, or just couldn't manage it. In fact, the equity committee learned that that wasn't the case, that there are many schools who wanted something else. They were looking for something different to implement into their programming and their processes, which was certainly acceptable given the diversity of our school district and the diversity of our learning needs. So just to get to your rationale piece, I just wanted to hit on that because you did raise that. Did you have a follow-up, Trustee Duncan? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and that all helps. So thank you for that context. And so when I look at the 4-year budget allocation suggested, how does that differ from what's already being allocated to elementary schools to develop their literacy programs?
Superintendent Green or to David?
David, go ahead.
Yeah, so the current cost of reading recovery for our 14 schools that are currently having a reading recovery program is approximately $485,000 is the current cost. So in terms of extra supplementary funding as a district, as you know, each school has an operating budget and they may allocate money towards literacy programs. As the district team, we support literacy in a variety of ways. As Charmaine and Carrie have spoken a little bit about the early years, we're also, Carrie and the team, we're also looking at supporting a number of schools with a literacy series that's coming up with 4 of our schools that's starting this week rather, on Friday. So there is those supplementary programs that are happening, continuing through the district team. But in terms of an additional cost right now, we're looking at reading recovery costs of $485,000 that's currently supporting 14 of our 27 schools.
Thank you, David. Trustee Duncan, are you okay? Can I go over to Trustee Rob Painter, or do you want to just have a quick follow-up?
Yeah, thanks. I'll wait. I think I need to unpack the budget a little bit more, but I'm mindful of the time and that other people probably have some questions. So can I just reserve the right to talk a little more about budget at the end?
You can reserve that right, Trustee Duncan. That is just fine. Trustee Rob Painter, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I appreciate the details you've been providing. I guess one of the things I'm having trouble wrapping my head around right now is that, as I understood, reading recovery was paid for 50% by the school and 50% by the district. So in effect, the district was providing, it might be perceived as a subsidy to some schools that other schools weren't getting. And I don't know how the budget worked out, and if that money that the district was providing to those schools was going to other schools in another form. That I'd like some clarification about that at some point. But I guess for me, if this is net new money to schools, then what I would be interested is seeing some sort of not like a grant application or anything like that, but some sort of a proposal that's going to describe for us, and this could feed into the strategic plan and the work that we've just heard explained, how this money is actually going to move the needle for those. If this isn't just balancing out so reading recovery is everywhere, then I guess I'd like to know more about how a school would propose to use it before I would necessarily be in support of it. Thank you.
Superintendent or David? Yeah, Superintendent Green, go ahead.
I think that's an excellent question, because that's exactly what we are focusing on. And David can certainly speak to some of the literacy programs and where they're at and the results they're getting. We have worked very closely, and I'm going to use Paul Pantaleo as an example. He has been a teacher who used to be a reading recovery teacher, actually, and has moved off of more of a comprehensive literacy program such as this. And he works incredibly closely with our team on developing this program over a set of 4 years that actually monitors every single student where they begin with their literacy program on their data, the interventions and the work they do under a comprehensive literacy program from grade 1 all the way to grade 5, and tracks them as they move more into a normal. And his results have been amazing. So I totally agree with you, Trustee Painter, that this is the one piece we want to be putting both pieces together, that we're tracking every single student as they go through the literacy piece. And David, I know that you can speak a little bit more to it as you work one-to-one around those pieces.
David, we can go over to you if you want to just touch on that, or we can move to other questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just echo what Shelley's mentioned, is that we've got some incredible educators that work in our schools, and Paul is one individual who I had the privilege of working with for 4 years at Oakland's that did, again, reading recovery trained teacher, but we at Oakland's used a side-by-side approach as part of our comprehensive literacy program. So that was one component of the literacy program. And as Shelley mentioned, you know, the results, we got excellent results in terms of supporting learning and literacy moving forward at Oakland School.
Thank you, David. I'm mindful of the time. We do have a recommended motion in front of us. Can I have a mover for the motion? I believe I need it. Yes. Okay. I've got Chair Waters. Well, thank you very much. And any discussion on the motion on the floor? Seeing no discussion. Oh, Trustee Rob Painter, go ahead.
Not being a member of this committee, I really haven't got much to say, but it does strike me that moving this out of context of the broader budget discussion might be a little premature. I don't know what your thoughts.
My understanding is that part of the Equity Committee's work is to recommend budget pieces to the budget. So this does fall definitely in line with what the Equity Committee is tasked with doing. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to answer that. No, okay, Superintendent Green, go ahead.
It just is as you see within that motion that it's a consideration as you head into budget consideration time, looking at all the aspects that we could be looking at as a further budget. This will be one aspect that trustees can look at. Do we want to be budgeting over a period of time of 4 years for a detailed comprehensive literacy program that schools can have access to from year 1 to 4? And that's a budget consideration as we move into the larger budget process.
Thank you, Superintendent Green. Trustee Duncan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I suppose I'm going back to the budget aspect of this. I think it's great that we're considering the need to continue to allow schools to build a program that fits, that works for them, and that responds to the unique needs of their students. I guess I'm just coming back to the budget allocation, wanting to be clear on whether this is extra money, whether it's reallocated money, whether it's truly new money. And I'm thinking as well of how we ensure that it's equitably spent or utilized. I mean, I think certainly the initial discussions around reading recovery, what came across to me, and I think Trustee Rob Painter touched on this earlier, is that there seemed to be a potential concern around a lack of equity. So not that we need to have the same programs for every student, but that there is some equity in terms of the funds available to schools to build their program in the way that works for them. And so I guess I would want to know more before I felt like I was in a position to vote in favor one way or the other, at least in terms of the budget allocation part of this. I would want to know more about what our plan is for equitable access to this funding across all of our elementary schools. So that's the only thing I would say in terms of, I suppose that qualifies as debate. I don't know, Chair, does it qualify as debate? I think it does.
We'll count it. We'll count it. Thank you, Trustee Duncan. I'm not sure if Superintendent Green or David want to respond to the budget piece on that, but I'm not quite sure how you want to proceed with that question.
I totally agree with Trustee Duncan that if the board is going to allocate these monies towards the literacy program, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we would need to be connecting with the schools and finding out what exactly it is they would like to be doing and where they are on the continuum of an early literacy program. They may be looking towards resources. We certainly have heard from our French immersion folks that they would like to balance sometimes resources, and they too are on a literacy continuum. And so finding out what their plan is, and that would be in line with our school plans as we look towards their strategic plan, and then where they are on the literacy continuum and what they need to do, how we need to support them and where they are on that budgeting. And once again, back to what Trustee Painter said, how we are going to be observing how our kids are doing over a period of time and the supports they need. I know that Kim has been putting into our minds a piece that's a little bit different than what we've done so far, and that's to be thinking ahead rather than what money have we got and where can we shift it to. And so this is that first big, huge step for us that says we believe in this piece for early literacy. As a district, we have aligned to that, and we need to be putting this money forward into early literacy program. And then Kim has to work with us on those beliefs we have in the budget process that we're going to go to, and what changes, what doesn't occur any longer, where that money is coming from. And I think that's all part of the process that we're trying to move into thinking forward rather than thinking, what have we got from behind? And so it's a change for us, but I think it's a valuable change.
Trustee Duncan, I'm just going to pause for a sec because I saw Trustee Ferris with his hand up. So I just want to go to Trustee Ferris first, and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you. Yes, my understanding is that we can easily support this motion tonight because it will go to the board and it will go to the budget process, and nothing, even if we pass the motion, nothing final is being determined here. It really is our opportunity to examine a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Ferris. We'll go back to Trustee Duncan.
That helps. Thank you, Trustee Ferris. That helps actually. When I'm looking at the motion, I'm just looking at the wording again, and with the exception of coach approach, which I'm not sure that I understand, which I probably should understand before voting for a motion. I'm looking at the wording and I see what you mean, that we're being asked to consider a question as part of that process, that budget process, rather than it committing us to doing anything. So can I please just have the coach approach explained to me before we vote? Thank you.
David, I'll turn it over to you, the master of the coach approach. Go ahead.
So when I think of with the coach approach, if you can think alongside teachers working alongside each other in the context of a classroom and supporting each other through kind of a coaching mentoring model. And so often, again, just using Paul Pantaleo as an example, Paul will go into a classroom and support alongside another classroom, kind of that job embedded Pro-D, where he's working alongside a teacher, showing them different skills and styles in terms of supporting that teaching process and that literacy supports. And again, that's that coaching peer mentorship program that we're talking about.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. Thank you, Trustee Duncan, for the thumbs up. I'm guessing that helped. Great. So seeing no more questions, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the recommended motion, did you want me to read it out? I guess I'll read it really quickly. That the Board of Education of School District 61, Greater Victoria, commit to an annual elementary school investment in literacy according to each elementary school's unique needs and in alignment with the strategic plan using the coach approach, reading recovery, or other established literacy program, and further, that the board consider an amount of $530,000 in its 2021-2022 budget, deliberations to align to the strategic plan, and a literacy focus. That was rather fast. There we go. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Very good, everybody. We passed that. I'm not sure who is receiving the questions. Were there any questions to the question period email address?
There were no questions, Chair.
Thank you, Colin. No notices of motion, no general announcements. So before we adjourn, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. This was a fantastic, informative, wonderful meeting. It gave me lots of goosebumps and really good feelings. So thank you, everybody who participated tonight. And I'll now seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Have a really great night, and we will see you in Zoom sometime. Thanks, everybody.